I have something super exciting here. I think this might be the biggest camera release for Leica in the last few years. Honestly, thinking about it, maybe the last 10 years. I have the brand new Leica Q3 43 here. It's got the new 43mm apo lens versus the 28 we normally see on the Q. I took it out on a few different shoots. Wanted to just try it out in some varying situations with the short time I've had with it, give you my first impressions, and kind of see how it will fit into my workflow. All right, I have to admit something. I actually haven't owned a Q since the original one came out. Now, the reason for that, generally I'm using an M. I mean, I am an M guy through and through, as you can see here, and I do have an SL2S, which I absolutely love, and I use that commercially to shoot a few different M lenses on there. I actually don't own any SL lenses, but for me, it's gonna be a 35 or a 50 on there, and it's kind of that secondary camera that's a little more discreet. It's gonna take some behind the scenes stuff or some intimate moments, things like that, where I don't want to disturb my subject, my normal big cameras. So generally that's the M for me. The 28 is amazing, but it's just not quite the focal length that I prefer to use for that. So when I saw that this is gonna have a 43, kind of splitting that difference between 35 and 50, man, I was excited. Okay, so stepping back in time a little bit. The original Q came out in June of 2015, and I think Leica expected it to be a relatively popular camera, but I've heard something that they sold like 5 or 10 times, I don't know, maybe it's more than that, than they expected. I mean, it was just an absolute hit. And yeah, I mean, it's really probably one of the most popular, if not the most popular digital cameras Leica has ever made. So to see it with this new focal length here, I think this is also going to be a hit. And I even see people using both of them. I mean, what a great combo. 28, 43 kind of gives you the best of both worlds. I'm excited to see how people fit this camera into their workflow. Right away, when you pick this new Q43 up, I would say it feels very solid. It's the Leica build quality you expect. Of course, it's not an M. It's not made of brass, although even some of the new M's have aluminum top and bottom plates. But it's premium, as it should be for this price. And the other thing, I mean, since I'm coming from basically the original Q or an SL without any of these flip screens, I want to say I know that the flippy screen, or tilty screen, I guess this doesn't flip, has a bit of controversy behind it. And yes, it's not as clean looking as something that didn't have it, like the last generation Qs. But I'll say, number one, in the real world, using a camera like this, I love having a screen that tilts down and tilts up like this. It really allows angles to be captured easier and quickly. Of course, you could still do it through the viewfinder or laying down on the ground or standing on a ladder. But personally, as a real working photographer, I do really enjoy having the screen. And I must say that the build quality of this, and you can just feel there is zero flex. I mean, Leica definitely over-engineered this thing. The one thing I would say that I do like, some Fuji cameras have like a button here where you can flip it out vertically. I would love to see that eventually, but I do think that would maybe cut down on how rigid this thing is and how sturdy it is. But yeah, I mean, overall, the build quality is great. The lens feels nice. Even when you're manually focusing, it feels great. So definitely what you would expect from a Leica at this price point with a camera like this for the build quality. Okay, this is not going to be a spec reading video. I mean, this camera's got 60 megapixels. It's got the tri-resolution sensor. It's got an apo lens. It's amazing. But for me, it's more about how it works in the real world. That's what we're going to get into this video. But quickly, I just want to compare this to the Q3, the Q2, kind of see the differences and kind of get into that just a little bit. So obviously the biggest change is the lens. And from what I can tell, although I don't own a Q3, I think menu-wise and kind of feature-wise, except for a few things like obviously the crop modes are going to be a little longer since you start with a longer lens and you can crop in with that. But other than that, I think really it's a Q3 with a 43 apo lens on it. That's the biggest difference. And really other than that, I think they're very similar, it seems to me. Couple other things I'm noticing. The hood's a little different shape. It kind of reminds me of that 35 Apo M. You see here we have this gray leatherette, which I've seen quite a bit of controversy about. First of all, Leica is probably going to offer color changes. If you hate this, you want to change it to black, you'll be able to do that, but they had to differentiate the camera. The other thing I'll say about it, it's not quite as light as it looks in some of the press photos that I've seen. So just keep in mind, it's a nice dark gray. It's nothing crazy, nothing to worry about. The other thing I would say, it still has the macro mode like the 28 lux on the Q3 has, but it seems like it's about double the distance. So this says 0.6 minimum focus, although like the 28, it does go past that a bit. But from what I'm seeing, it's about double the distance, but you have a longer lens. So the reproduction, if I'm somewhat correct. I think it's basically the same. So it's a little farther back, but then you have a longer focal. So other than that, it really just seems like a Q3 with a longer lens to me. Getting this thing out into the real world, I wanted to test it on a range of things, although I was limited on time. So I will be doing a lot of portrait shoots and fashion stuff and automotive, many other things coming up here soon, so keep an eye out for that. But for the limited amount of time I had, I wanted to try it on a range of different subjects. First of all, when I get a new camera, I always make a strap for it, so that's what I did first, and I photographed a bit of that process. Plus, I did some product photography of some of the bags that I make and the straps, because generally I'm using my SL with a macro lens. Now, this being Apo, a little bit longer, I was hopeful that it wouldn't distort quite like the 28 does when you get so close to your subjects, and it really performed nicely for that. So we'll check out some of those photos. And then I just took it out for a little walk in the streets down in San Diego. Nothing crazy there, just kind of photographing what I saw as I walked through the day. We got some nice photos there that you can check out. And then finally, I took it over to my friend Tim's studio. He's got some amazing hypercars. We photographed his Koenigsegg CCX, Big Brother. And again, 43, really anything under 50, not something I normally shoot automotive-wise, but check these photos out, see what you think, and I'm pretty impressed with this thing. All right, we're in this amazing studio here. We have the Koenigsegg CCX Big Brother, all in exposed carbon. It's absolutely beautiful. The one thing I want to say is when it comes to shooting cars, normally I'm not going to go under 50 millimeters because you start to get some distortion, especially when you get close. Starts to make the proportions of the car look a little weird. So I really want to see if 43 gets me close enough to that 50 versus a 35 and kind of minimize some of that distortion. Now, with the lens being Apo designated, I'm confident that it may do this. And I know that the Q43 is going to be really popular for people with cars and automotive enthusiasts. Let's try this thing out. Let's see how the images look, and let's get into it. One thing I love to do when I photograph cars, especially in a studio, is some light painting. So I did a couple long exposures, which admittedly were not great on the original Qs, and I had no problems. I was able to do 30-second exposures here, and yeah, I'm really pleased with the performance. It has noise reduction, which you can turn off if you want to. You can do that later in post-production, something just to note, but overall, for a long exposure that I did here, it worked great. When it comes to photographing a hypercar like this, there's many details on these cars that are unique, and it could be unique to that individual vehicle, even within a production run of maybe 10 or 25 or even 100 of these cars. They're very personalized, individualized, and this car specifically has gone back to the factories for some enhancements and upgrades. So having the macro mode really lets me hone in on those details, kind of show a range of what makes this car special. Let me get in the interior, let me get in the engine bay, let me kind of show a range of photographs. So I did a kind of a variation of macro shots to show those details, some mid shots, some tight, some pulled back, to kind of give you an overall feel of not only the car, but the individual specification that you see here. Moving into the macro mode here, I was really blown away by the sharpness and honestly the lack of distortion when getting this close. Showing the details of the carbon fiber on the wheel that you see here, kind of looking at the crest on the front of the car, and some of the carbon details in the engine bay. I mean, it's just really incredible. I mean, wow, I'm blown away by how good this lens has performed here. One of the first things I do when I get a new camera, I make a strap for it. And that's what I did here. I got right into the strap making, and I wanted to document some of that process. Some of the photos you're seeing here are me making the strap by hand. Throw it on the camera here, it looks nice. I tried to match it with the gray, found some gray crocodile, looks really good on here. But one thing I use my SL a lot for, and normally with the 70mm macro lens, is I'm taking product photography, shooting as I go, and then at the end when I finish a bag or a strap, it's photographing that finished product. And not something I normally would do with this shorter of a focal length, but man, I was actually pretty impressed. There's not a ton of distortion, not a lot of bowing, and yeah, overall, I mean, I think it's a great camera for product photography, which probably not a ton of people would think of it as or use it, but that macro mode is really, really nice, and it helps you kind of make beautiful product photos like this. Finally, I got the camera out down in San Diego. I wanted to try some street photography, just kind of walk, test the dynamic range, just have some fun getting out and photographing. And one thing I want to say, I didn't expect to like the crop modes or even use them, but I thought, you know what, with this much resolution, this good lens, I might as well try it. And to be honest, it went from a feature that I'm like, why would they have this? And some of the shorter crop modes, I mean, the really tight ones, I don't really think they're super usable, but I think it's like 60 mil, maybe 75, something like that. Some of those like mid to longer ranges, man, I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed with how good they look. Now remember, you're not getting the focal compression of a longer lens, and it is just a crop. But let's just say it went from a feature I didn't think I would use to a feature I'm pretty glad is in the camera. In conclusion, I wasn't totally sold on this thing right away. Like I said, I'm not a huge Q person as it is, but I think it was mainly because of that 28mm focal length. And I can genuinely see this being in my workflow and kind of in my rotation. And man, what a great camera to just have as a secondary or even as your main camera. I really think this is a great complement to an M or an SL or even another Q with that 28mm lens. I think wedding photographers, portraiture, kind of incognito photography, even some product stuff. I know you watch guys out there will love this camera. It's great for those wrist shots. And yeah, overall, I really enjoyed using this new Q3 43. All right, thanks for coming along for this non-technical review of me just enjoying this new Q, enjoying the new focal length, trying out the lens a bit, and really just fitting it into my workflow and how I like to photograph. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.